there's so many things that were shooting through my mind as you were talking, because I've thought a lot about genres. And I'm not a designer or a product thinker, but I've thought a lot about genres as they've moved over time. And I think RTS and fighting games are, to me, these two things that, like, they both sort of had their time of being the big thing, or at least a big chunk. And then they kind of both got eaten by a changing marketplace and a changing player. Um, and I think there's a part, I'm sure you feel this is like a Street Fighter 2, but one of the ones like I grew up on was StarCraft and StarCraft Brood War
Sure.
and stuff like that. And like just a lot of games like that. And there's a part of me that just out of pure nostalgia is just like, man, could someone make a game like that? But the problem is it's an immature thought, because
Yeah.
the odds of them actually making something that's better than Brood War is very low, because that's a really great game. Um, and that time period, I think, is past, and RTSs have been eaten by tower defense and MOBAs and like a set of other things. Even your sort of auto battlers, I think, kind of fill some sort of space that people used to go to strategy for. And I haven't thought as much about fighting, but as you were talking about that, I was just thinking about like that idea of how many people were wasting so much time fighting Arma 2 servers to play DayZ.
Perfect example. Yeah.
And 'cause Aaron would always bring this up. He's just like there's something here, because people will deal with all this crap to try to play this game. And then same thing as Battle Royale started becoming a thing. And H1Z1 kind of tickled that a little bit, and then PUBG just nailed it. But immediately after, Spaces for Innovation, Warzone is meaningfully different from PUBG, whereas PUBG has much more of the simulation element. Warzone it's Call of Duty, but it has their engine, that feel, that way of operating, but actually done in a pretty slick way. And then you have the other one that I think is still around and living is Apex Legends, and that one, it's very different, like pacing and everything else, but same overall idea. And it's so anyway, that one is an interesting one where you saw, because I think you did see players playing PUBG who, one, were super excited to have this experience at all, but then to that idea of like that hunger for something new, there was also this, man, could someone make this like cleaned up so I didn't have to load bullets into my gun every time I pick one up that like came with ammo in it, or just little simple things that, again, were actually, I think, and you could disagree with this, were wrong for what PUBG was trying to be, but were right for that other game. Whatever it would be. And that's just one example. Obviously that wasn't the design innovation of those other products, but yeah, there's something there around like that shifting and that like looking, and still that's tough. That's so tough.
That point that you bring up is one that I feel really strongly about. This idea that, like, I mean, there are people who are making RTSs today. And I think it's predicated on one, a love for the genre. It's one of my favorite genres. But to me, the bet only makes sense if there's an audience today who is like, yes, the RTS experience is where we are in terms of like what we want to be playing today. To me, it's not even a question of, can we make a game as good as Brood Wars? Because I don't think that would actually be the determining factor as to whether or not that game is successful today. Is today's audience interested in Brood Wars? And I think that can be a really hard question to answer. Again, if you're moving more off of like intuition or like your experience and like, well, this is the thing that I want to see, so I have to assume that there's an audience out there who wants to see it as well. I think there's an additional level of external validation that I think teams do themselves a favor in going through.
You mentioned earlier that the idea of intuition, and it's certainly not a bad move to write the story you'd want to read, or make the movie you'd want to watch, or create the game you'd want to play. I think what I'll call out, I think survivorship bias comes in pretty strongly there, because I think a lot of people have actually done that. They're like, this is the game I want to play. and there's not an audience. And I
Right.
think for me, if you're realizing that's true, let's say you've somehow, you're relatively modern in your approach and you're actually doing some level of validation and you're realizing like the game I want to play is not the game other people want to play. Or
Yeah.
at least I can't find this audience. I don't know who they are. And so
Yeah.
unfortunately now I have to go to a place of doubting my intuition. And I have to go, and this is where I like kind of the article you wrote. And I like how you were breaking this down because yes, it is a valid approach to make the thing you want to play, but it fails. And we
Yeah.
can stare all day at the successes of that because there's many. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what if you realize it's failing and now you're going, well, shoot, I was prototyping this and I did some stuff and I'm kind of selling everybody on this dream of like, this is the game we all want to play, right? But it turns out
Sure.
that I can't find anybody else.
Yeah.
Now I need to do a pivot or, outside of like shutting down the team or studio or whatever. I need to do a pivot into like, okay, well, what will we do?
Yeah.
And going into these places of like, well, where are players excited? And maybe not a ton, but where are they passionate? Where are they punching down walls? I also love that you called out the mod community because I think the mod community is such a great example of actually how I think large companies should relate to live service products. Is that like you start this really small and you start like engaging with the community around a very early product, and then they're going to give you a lot of feedback. Like Counter-Strike still exists. Dota in its new forms of League of Legends and Dota 2 still exists.
Yeah.
Everybody that tried to do direct copies of those that didn't that did the thing that you were talking about earlier, which is like, oh, they came out with a blah type of game. Well, we better have one too because we're a big game company and we need to, and it's like, no, the FromSoft thing of like they are such an example. Like, I don't like Dark Souls games. I still bought
Hmm.
Elden Ring. I
Sure.
played Elden Ring. I beat a couple of bosses. It's still not my thing. I'm not offended or bothered that I bought the game. It's a
Right.
good game and I enjoyed it. And again, was it me for like the long haul and getting all the way to the end and like following this? No, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the co-op aspects of it. Like I enjoyed running around the world. Um, and it was just like I was just impressed actually as a gamer playing this. It's like this is really cool and really well done. Um, but again, it was that one that was like they hit an audience with Elden Ring that was not the Dark Souls player.
Right.
That it wasn't
Very
just
true.
pure Dark Souls. It suddenly it like broadened appeal somehow in a bunch of little subtle things they did. So I'm
Yeah.
not going anywhere with any of this. I'm rambling on, but
Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah.
Well, there was a point that you hit on earlier, which is sort of like, a team is in development and they sort of find themselves, I guess, that they've made something that maybe they find out, oh, players don't want this.
Mm-hmm.
The trick is to find that out as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the trick is not to avoid that scenario entirely. I actually think that's probably impossible, right? Like that, and my guidance here in this framework is not a surefire, guaranteed way to make nothing but certified bangers for the rest of your career. It's for me,
Darn it!
it's
Everybody just turned
it,
off the podcast, Omar.
yeah.
It's
Sorry, it's risk mitigation, and I describe it as such. This is just my way of mitigating risk. Let me play to my strengths, and let me go look for opportunities of innovation in places where there's demonstrable player interest. Let me sprint as fast as I can towards a playable experience that I can put in front of real players and validate my assumptions around. I don't get into a ton of this in the article, but that particular project that I wrote about and referenced was one of the smallest development teams I've ever been a part of. It was one of the cheapest product projects that I've ever funded. Um, and it was one of the funnest experiences that we ever made, that I've ever worked on as a developer.
Mhm.
Um, the first thing that we prioritized was a demonstrable, playable prototype of that experience, and we made it with like, gosh, 7 people or something like that. 7 people, including me, and I'm useless when it comes to like early game development, right? I can't actually build anything. Um, and it was fun. It was fun from the first sprint. The first sprint, we had a 2D abstracted sort of like top-down version that was just proving out the game mode. We were sort of like inventing a new style of play, and we were like, well, we don't really know what this game mode is like. We don't know if it's going to be fun, but we know we shouldn't have to wait until we've built dozens and dozens of complex systems and high fidelity characters and different assets before we can realize that. There's probably some version of this that we can build to understand the fun of this new game mode that we're thinking about. And so we built it in 2 weeks and we were playing it, and it was fun. And it was good enough to move on to the next sort of unknown or project risk that we had. And we iterated in that manner, until we had a prototype with dozens of people running around in a 3D environment with melee combat. And it was great. And I think you have to reach that point of that sort of playable, and you just have to put it in front of people, and you have to respect what they say. You have to actually like use the process of player validation as a tool in your product development. If you look at players and they don't like what you're making, and you say, "Well, maybe the players are wrong," I think you're just being delusional. Again, you can probably make a great game that way. I'm sure there's many developers who have just blown through playtests and ignored what the players said and released successful product. Again, I'm preaching risk mitigation.
Yeah.
This is my way of making sure to the organization and to myself that I'm being honest, that I'm trying to develop something that players want to play.
There's an idea I have of like you're trying to tip the odds, right? You're trying to put your thumb on the scale as best you can on the success side. And while, to your point, there's somebody out there who ignored all the feedback that their game sucked and they were just like, no, it just needs this one other thing, and once I get that in, it's going to all click and it's going to be amazing. And they were right, and the game is now
right.
And like that totally, I'm sure that's happened. Simultaneously, survivorship bias. How many other people stubbornly stuck to a plan, like what they had in their head, ignored everything, kept rolling, and then went, "Oh shoot," and maybe to the point of actually even shipping a game and spending all that money and building up that team, and dragging other people along, perhaps willingly, but just then you like get to the end and you're just like, "Oh, nobody likes this." Well, that sucks.